Hi there and welcome to episode 12 of the House Detective Diaries, where I take you through some of the interesting or unusual things I've uncovered during my house history research. In this episode, I'm going to share with you how the suburb of Bardon got its name. I'm going to take you on a little virtual tour of two incredible buildings in Rosewood out past Ipswich. One is a gorgeous church and the other one is just this stunning house. I'm also going to take you through another little research trap that I came across, and I'll also be talking about one of the earliest houses built in the suburb of Dutton Park in Brisbane. I hope you enjoy watching. Where did Bardon get its name from? Well, land in what is now the suburb of Bardon, which had been stolen from First Nations people, was surveyed and subdivided by the Queensland government in 1862. The first land sales were then held the following year, and a huge portion of land in this area was bought by a gentleman called Joshua Jays. Jays was a builder, an architect, a stonemason, and he also owned a stone quarry. The land he bought in this area included 39 acres on the western side of what is now Simpsons Road and Cooper's Camp Road. He built a beautiful stone house on this section of land in 1864 and christened it Bardon House. This name's thought to come from a place called Bardon Hill in Leicestershire, which was Jay's home county in England. The area where Jay's house was located was known by a range of different names over the years. It was known as West Paddington, Upper Paddington, Jubilee and Ithaca Creek, just to name a few. But eventually the area surrounding his house took on the name of his house and became known as Bardon. And eventually in 1926 that was officially adopted as the name of the suburb. So that's how Bardon got its name, from Joshua Jay's house. Amazingly, Jay's house still survives in the suburb. It's a gorgeous two-storey stone Gothic styled house, and it's now within the campus of St. Joseph's Catholic Primary School, which I just find it amazing that it survived. Absolutely incredible. St. Bridget's Church at Rosewood. My husband and I went for a bit of a country drive last weekend. Later I'll also talk about my favourite house in Rosewood as well, so stay tuned for that. When we were wandering around, I saw reference to St. Bridget's Church. This triggered something in the little part of my brain that stores useless heritage and history information. I was sure I'd read something about this church, so I jumped online and had a quick look, and then I remembered it is a spectacular, huge timber church, and I'd been wanting to see this for a long time, so I decided that we'd better go and have a look at it. It did not disappoint. It is a gorgeous church and it is indeed huge. It's beautiful. It was built between 1909 and 1910, and it was actually designed by Reverend Horan. It was built under the supervision of a builder and contractor called R.J. Murphy, but apparently the local townspeople all pitched in and helped with the building, which I thought was just a lovely little story. Not only is the outside of this church absolutely gorgeous with the timber decoration and the beautiful stained glass, but the interior is stunning as well. Unfortunately, I didn't get to go inside and have a look at this, but I've had a look at a couple of photos online and it's absolutely remarkable. One of the things that is significant about the interior is in 1935, a mural was painted by the celebrated Queensland artist William Bustard, and this apparently still survives in the interior. When I was reading up on the history of this building, there's quite a number of pages that claim either this is the largest timber church in Australia, it's the largest timber church in Queensland, it's the largest Catholic timber church in Queensland, or it's the largest Catholic timber church in Australia. Now, I'm not too sure any of those are actually true. There's a St. Kilian's in Bendigo, which seems to be more widely known as the largest Catholic timber church as well as the largest timber church in Australia. I haven't measured either church, so I can't solve that dispute now, but regardless of which one is bigger or whether it's the biggest in Australia or Queensland, I think you can agree it's a gorgeous church and a beautiful part of our architectural heritage. Unfortunately, I couldn't get too close to the building because it had a temporary fence around it, or a TFD as I like to call them, temporary fence of death, because you often know that demolition is imminent when one of those goes up around a house or a property. But the church is on the State Heritage Register, so it is protected. However, it has stopped being used because apparently it started to subside and the floor was getting a bit of a slope to it, and it was affecting the structure. Now this is a real worry, because as soon as a building loses its use and is mothballed like this, the risk of something bad happening to it increases dramatically. And it's also incredibly difficult to find another use for purpose-built huge timber buildings like this. Now, I completely understand that it's a very expensive process to maintain these buildings, let alone to fix structural issues, but it just made me cringe seeing this place just with the fence around it and not being in use. I'm not sure what is happening with the building at the moment, but I really hope some funding is found to fix these problems and to put it back in use. In the last episode, I spoke a little bit about a research trap that I'd come across where an application to demolish and rebuild a house had been found, but that actually never happened. This week, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the dangers when you try to date a house just based on its appearance. The client had been told that the house was built in 1920 based on some research done by someone else. The first thing I do when I'm hired to research a property is pull up images of it and have a look at the style of the house, because that will give me a broad range of when I think the house was most likely built. You always have to confirm everything with documentary evidence and a range of different types of evidence though. The facade of this house absolutely looks 1920s or 1930s. It's got the stucco finish and the bay window, just as a couple of examples of characteristics of that era of housing. And that then, on the face of it, would match with this date of 1920 that they'd been told. Once you look past the facade of this building though, behind it is a roofline that is characteristic of houses that are usually built before 1900. So that is a big red flag to me when I'm looking at this property. It's what's called a pyramid style roof, where it is basically square in plan and it looks like a pyramid, simple as that. This style roof was normally built before 1900. Now there are later examples, but in this street in particular, I could see that it had been subdivided but before 1900, and the house style also looked like it was before 1900. I then looked into it in more detail. As I said, consulted a range of different documents, and it turns out that it was built in about 1901, and then they've modernised it in the 20s and 30s to keep with the current style, as we do now with our properties. And in fact, this was so common, and there was even one building company in particular that targeted work like this. They had advertisements in the newspaper that would show the before and after of old Queenslanders being converted to a much more modern looking 1920s or 1930s multi-gable roof design. What I basically wanted to flag was you cannot judge a book by its cover when it comes to Brisbane houses, and you always need to dig a little bit deeper. And as I said last time, never ever rely on one source of information or the style of the house to come up with a definite date. You always need to consult multiple sources and often cross-reference them. I started this video by talking about Bardon and Bardon House and how it gave its name to the suburb. This house that I'm going to talk about next, it didn't give its name to the suburb, but it is indirectly the source of quite a number of street names around it. The house was called Wakamba, and it was located in what is Dutton Park today. It's in the part of Dutton Park and sort of on the border of Highgate Hill, in the little triangle that is surrounded by Gladstone Road and Gloucester Street and Annerley Road. In February 1861, this land was part of 79 acres that Edward Dayton purchased from the government. By the end of that same year, he was living in a house on this land that he had christened Wakamba. Edward lived there with his family for quite a number of years, but in 1876 he subdivided off a big chunk of his land. It was subdivided into residential blocks and was christened the Dayton Estate. As part of this development, a number of streets were laid out that survive to this day, and Dayton actually named them after family members. So there's Dayton Road, not surprisingly, named after him. Tillow Street was after his mum's maiden name. And then Nelson Street was a tribute to his second wife's maiden name. The house was subsequently converted into a convent. A descendant of Edward Dayton's actually told me that it was relocated out to Augathala, where it continued use as a convent, but sadly it eventually burnt down. What I love is, even though we've lost this house, there's reminders of it and the family in the streets surrounding where it once was located. So there's still Wakamba Street, and there's also a Dayton Street in addition to the other family named roads I mentioned earlier. I just think it's great that the memory of this house and this family lives on in the street names in this area of Dutton Park. I mentioned earlier that I was going to tell you about one of my favourite houses in Rosewood from when we visited out there. It's such a striking house. Like, I loved so many houses in Rosewood. There's some gorgeous old ones, but this one just stands out so much. I think it's on such a prominent block and with its huge grounds. As we were driving past, my husband pointed out that there was a plaque in front of the fence. So of course I had to jump out and have a read about it. This told me that it was called Glendalough. So when I got home, I had a look into its history in a bit more detail. And it's quite interesting because no one knows exactly when the first house was built on this block. And I was thinking to myself, something I might have to research in future when I have time. But it's thought that there was already a house there when the property was bought by Thomas Ernest Bulcock in 1910. Bulcock was quite a wealthy man, and it's thought that he immediately set about making extensions and alterations to this house in order to convert it into a house that was suitable enough for his standing in society and to demonstrate his wealth. So in 1911, he took out a mortgage for £800, which is a huge amount of money for that time. And it's thought that that's what was used to fund these renovations and alterations. The house has actually undergone a number of changes over the years, so it's a bit tricky to tell what it would have looked like originally. But there's this fantastic photo from 1919 that shows what it looks like at that time, and you can see from that it's had a couple of extensions that were done by Bulcock, and it's already quite a grand house at that date. And as I do, when I got home and I was doing a bit of research on it online, I was thrilled to find out that it had been on the market in 2018. So of course I had a big old sticky beak at the interior photos, and I'll share them here, but it looks absolutely beautiful inside, and it was certainly a very grand home, and still is a grand home, even though the exterior looks a little bit hodgepodge now because there's been a sequence of additions made to the original style. But just a gorgeous house. As I said, there's lots of beautiful homes in Rosewood, but this one's pretty special. May or may not have dropped my business card in their letterbox if they ever want it researched in more detail. And this is why I love going for country drives, because you never know what kind of beautiful house you're going to stumble upon. And then I go home and I learn the story of yet another house and its history. So absolutely love it, and I was very happy that we came across this place. I hope you enjoyed hearing about those two gorgeous buildings in Rosewood and all the other little tidbits I spoke to you about today. If you wouldn't mind liking, subscribing and telling all your friends about what an awesome channel this is, I would be very grateful. And if you'd like me to research your house, there's plenty of information about my research packages on my website at housedetective.com.au. See you next time.
This is a rather shameless promotion. Hey, it worked on me. Me too.